When we talk about emotional vulnerability, we're really talking about trust, boundaries, and self-respect. Sharing your story, your pain, your fears, those are sacred parts of who you are. They're not badges you hand out to anyone who simply shows you a little attention or says the right things on a good day. Women are often socialized to believe that openness is the fastest way to connection, that being emotionally available is the way to win trust or love. But in reality, what we're doing when we expose ourselves too early is giving someone a blueprint to our emotional wiring before we even know who they are or whether they're worthy of that kind of access. Let's put it plainly, not everyone deserves to hear your truth. Not every man, no matter how charming or kind he seems at first, is entitled to your pain. There's a difference between being honest and being exposed. In interrogation and protective services, one of the first lessons you learn is this: the more someone knows about you, the easier you are to manipulate. That same principle applies in everyday relationships. If a man knows what breaks you, what scares you, what makes you feel small, and he hasn't earned your trust, you're giving him leverage without even knowing it. It might not happen right away. In fact, it rarely does. But over time, if the wrong person has access to your emotional vulnerabilities, they can and often will use them to control, belittle, or guilt you into silence. Women are especially at risk of mistaking empathy for safety. Just because someone listens doesn't mean they care. Just because someone asks questions doesn't mean they deserve the answers. And just because you feel seen in a moment of connection doesn't mean you are truly understood. Emotional intimacy is built slowly, over time, through action and consistency. It's not something that blooms overnight. When you reveal your deepest emotional wounds to a man too early in a relationship, you may be hoping to build closeness, but what you're actually doing is giving someone a weapon they can use later, should the relationship sour or shift in power. There's a psychological phenomenon we call trauma bonding when people connect quickly over pain or shared suffering. It feels powerful. It feels like real intimacy, but it's often just an illusion. Real intimacy isn't based on mutual brokenness. It's built on respect, communication, and accountability. So instead of rushing to reveal your history, your heartbreaks, betrayals, childhood trauma, or fears of abandonment, hold that space for yourself. Let a man show you through his behavior, through his emotional intelligence, through his consistency, that he is someone you can trust with your softer side. We live in a culture that encourages oversharing. Social media thrives on it, reality television glamorizes it, but oversharing doesn't equal strength. In fact, oversharing can be a trauma response, a subconscious strategy to avoid rejection or to fast-track closeness. When you find yourself pouring out your story to someone new, pause and ask yourself, am I doing this because I feel safe or because I want to feel safe? That question can protect you from mistaking attention for trustworthiness. Let's also talk about the difference between honesty and vulnerability. Honesty is telling someone the truth when it's appropriate. Vulnerability is allowing yourself to be emotionally exposed. But not all situations require vulnerability, and not all people can handle it. Vulnerability is powerful only when used in the right context. It's like a match. It can light a fire, or it can burn down a house. You have to know who you're handing the match to. Emotional self-control is one of the most underrated forms of strength. That doesn't mean being cold or detached. It means being discerning. You can be kind without being naive. You can be open without being reckless. You can be strong without being hardened. And that strength comes from knowing where your emotional boundaries lie. It comes from understanding that your past does not need to be a public offering in exchange for attention or validation. Remember, the right man won't demand access to your pain. He won't push you to reveal your traumas to prove you're real or authentic. He'll be patient. He'll understand that your story is yours to share when and if you're ready, and he won't punish you for protecting yourself. In fact, a man who's emotionally mature will respect your boundaries, not resent them. He'll recognize that your strength lies not in how much you share, but in how well you've learned to protect yourself from those who haven't earned your trust. There's power in mystery, power in pacing, power in self-respect. You don't need to spill your entire emotional history to be seen. What makes you beautiful, what makes you compelling, isn't your pain, it's your growth. It's how you carry yourself, how you protect your peace, so hold on to that. Don't confuse silence with weakness or privacy with distance. What you protect, you value, and you are valuable not because of what you've been through, but because of who you've become despite it. One of the biggest mistakes people make, especially women, is confusing openness with trustworthiness when it comes to finances. There's this unspoken pressure, often subtle and deeply ingrained, that says, if I don't reveal everything, it means I'm hiding something. But that's not true. Privacy is not secrecy, it's protection. And when it comes to money, your income, your savings, your investments, your debts, protection is not only smart, it's necessary. Let's get one thing straight. Your financial life is personal, and it should be treated like a vault. Not everyone should have the key. Just because a man shows interest in you doesn't mean he's entitled to know how much you earn, what you own, or what you owe. Those are details that should only come into play when a relationship has proven to be secure, committed, and mutually respectful. Until then, that information is on a need-to-know basis, and most people don't need to know. In my career working in national security and protective services, we didn't give out classified information to people just because they had a nice smile or asked politely. There were clearance levels, protocols, you had to earn the access. The same applies here. Financial intimacy should be treated like classified intel. You don't reveal everything until the person in front of you has shown that they're not just curious, they're responsible, trustworthy, and aligned with your values. Now let's talk about why women often feel the urge to disclose financial information early. Sometimes it's an attempt to be transparent. Other times, it's a way of trying to prove independence or capability to say, look, I don't need anything from you. But no matter the motive, early disclosure of financial data can backfire. It can attract the wrong kind of energy, from opportunistic men to insecure ones who feel threatened by a woman's financial power. And in some cases, it becomes a vulnerability that can be exploited emotionally, socially, or even legally. We've all heard the stories: women who get used for their resources, who sign loans or share access to accounts too early, who fund lifestyles or make financial sacrifices for men who never intended to invest back into the relationship. Those aren't just unfortunate events, those are avoidable outcomes, and they often begin with one small, well-meaning disclosure, a salary figure, a bank statement, a hint at a family inheritance. Suddenly, that information becomes a tool in someone else's hands, and you lose control over how it's used. A lot of women also carry guilt around financial success. They feel they need to downplay their achievements to make a man feel more comfortable, or they over-explain their earnings to justify their lifestyle. But the truth is, if a man can't handle your financial independence, he's not equipped to partner with you in a meaningful way. You should never shrink to accommodate someone's insecurity, especially not when it comes to something you've worked hard for. Financial boundaries are not a lack of trust, they are the foundation of it. If a man truly respects you, he won't demand to know your net worth or pressure you to share your financial details prematurely. He will understand that trust in this area must be built, not assumed. And you have the right to take your time. You have the right to observe, to assess, and to ask yourself, is this someone who makes smart decisions with money? Is this someone who plans, saves, and invests responsibly? Is this someone I would feel safe building a financial future with? Because here's the truth, money isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about values. It's about discipline, mindset, and long-term thinking. If someone is careless with their own finances, what makes you think they'll be careful with yours? If someone sees your financial success as a threat, not an asset, that's a red flag. And if someone tries to guilt you into sharing or spending, that's not love, that's control. We also have to talk about the emotional side of money. Many women carry financial trauma from past relationships, from childhood, or from societal messaging that told them they weren't good with money. That kind of trauma can show up in relationships through overgiving, undercharging, or allowing financial boundaries to be crossed because of guilt or fear of abandonment. But part of becoming truly resilient, becoming what I call bulletproof, is recognizing those patterns and interrupting them. You do not have to prove your worth through what you give, how much you earn, or how much access you allow. You are not an ATM. You are not a rescue plan. You are not a financial advisor to a grown man who refuses to grow up. You are a woman who has built something, and you have every right to protect it. There's strength in saying, "I'm not ready to share that." There's power in saying, "Let's talk about finances when we're building a future together, not while we're still figuring out if we align." And there is dignity in keeping some parts of your life private, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Your money is part of your freedom. Guard it, respect it, and never hand it over even in conversation to someone who hasn't shown the emotional maturity and character to respect you back. There's a misconception that closeness means sharing everything, all the time, with no filters, especially in romantic relationships. But let's set the record straight. Not everything in your life is meant for public consumption, and certainly not everything should be shared with a man just because he's close to you. One area in particular that deserves firm boundaries is your family, especially its dysfunctions, challenges, or private history. Those details, those dynamics are not a man's business until and unless he's proven that he's loyal, emotionally mature, and invested for the long haul. Women are often taught to be emotionally transparent, to bond through storytelling, to connect through vulnerability, and to prove authenticity by being real. So when someone seems kind, when a man listens well or appears emotionally available, many women start sharing family issues, conflicts with siblings, trauma from childhood, parents' dysfunction, even generational pain. The problem is that these stories can easily be misinterpreted, judged, or, in the worst-case scenario, weaponized against you later. Family is complicated, and that complexity is sacred. When you share it too freely, you may think you're building intimacy, but what you're actually doing is exposing something that doesn't just belong to you. It belongs to the people who lived it with you. Your mother, your father, your brothers and sisters, your extended family. When you speak on your family's dysfunction, you're not just revealing your own scars, you're sharing someone else's struggle. That deserves discretion, not impulse. We also have to talk about judgment because it's real. People will judge your family, and sometimes they'll judge you for it. A man who hears about your father's absence, your mother's depression, your sibling's addiction, or your cousin's criminal history may not say anything on the surface, but subconsciously, he may begin to build a narrative about you that has nothing to do with who you really are. That narrative could be, she comes from drama, she's used to chaos, maybe she's damaged. He may never say it out loud, but it will inform how he sees you, treats you, and ultimately values or devalues the relationship. You might be thinking, but shouldn't I be able to share everything with someone I care about? The answer is yes, eventually, and in stages. Trust is a process. Emotional security is a foundation that's built through time, consistency, and mutual respect. What you share at the beginning of a relationship should never be the deepest or most fragile parts of your story. You don't build strength in a structure by starting with the roof. You start with the foundation. The same applies here. Don't invite someone into the most sensitive parts of your life before they've shown they can handle the basics like keeping promises, managing conflict respectfully, or being emotionally consistent. And let's not ignore another dangerous trap. Some men use a woman's family history as a blueprint for how to manipulate her. If a man knows you had an emotionally unavailable parent, he may try to step into that space and create a dependency. If he knows you came from dysfunction, he may test your boundaries, assuming you're used to pain and will tolerate more than you should. In that sense, what seems like harmless storytelling can actually become a user manual for control, especially in the hands of someone emotionally manipulative. This is why discernment matters. Not everyone you date deserves to know the reasons behind your family's pain. Not every relationship is safe enough to hold those truths, and not every man will use that information with care. In fact, sometimes the more they know, the less they respect, especially if they sense they can use it as a way to exert power or shift blame when conflicts arise. There's also another layer, loyalty. How you speak about your family even when they've hurt you says something about your integrity. When you show discretion, when you set limits on how much you reveal, it communicates strength. It shows emotional maturity. And it shows that you're someone who can be trusted to protect what matters. A man who sees you honoring your family's privacy even when things are complicated will either respect you more or walk away. And if he walks away, that tells you everything you need to know. Your family history may be messy. It may be painful, but it is yours to protect not for the sake of shame, but for the sake of respect. You can talk about your values, your goals, your boundaries without laying bare every hardship your family has endured. You can build emotional connection without sacrificing your loyalty or exposing your family's struggle for someone else's curiosity or approval. You are allowed to say, "That's not something I'm ready to talk about." You are allowed to keep your family out of your romantic narrative until you feel deeply safe, deeply seen, and genuinely respected. And when the right man comes along, the kind who listens with his heart, and not just his ears, you'll know. Because he won't need your pain to validate your worth. He won't ask for details to measure how lovable you are. He'll focus on who you are now, not what your family got wrong. So protect your family's story like you would protect your own, with intention, with wisdom, and with boundaries that reflect how much you've grown. Because true strength isn't about how much you reveal. It's about how much you choose to keep sacred and who you allow into that sacred space. One of the most dangerous things a woman can do is hand over herself, doubt, to a man who hasn't proven he's emotionally safe. Self-doubt is a private battle. It's a whisper that lives in the background of your mind, and unless you've done the internal work, it can quietly sabotage your decisions, your self-worth, and your standards. When you reveal that uncertainty, especially to the wrong person, it can be misunderstood, judged, or even used against you. In any relationship dynamic, the balance of emotional power is constantly shifting based on what you share and how you're perceived. The moment you start telling a man that you don't feel good enough, that you question your intelligence, that you feel inferior to other women, even if it's just you trying to be real or honest, you're giving him insight into the softest parts of your psyche. And if that man is immature, insecure, or manipulative, he may not respond with care. He may respond with control, because now he knows how to destabilize your confidence when things aren't going his way. Think about this. In law enforcement and psychological operations, one of the most effective tactics for gaining control over someone is identifying their internal conflict, the belief they hold about themselves that makes them feel weak, ashamed, or not enough. Once you know someone's doubt, you don't need to shout to control them. You just press that button at the right moment. That's how people lose their voices. That's how they get silenced, not with force but with self-questioning, seated by someone who appeared to care. Now, this doesn't mean you should be emotionless or pretend you have it all figured out. That's not strength, that's a mask. But there's a time, a place, and most importantly, a person for everything. A healthy relationship doesn't require you to showcase your wounds early on to earn love. It doesn't require you to admit every fear to prove authenticity. A man who is emotionally safe will never demand your insecurities as proof of intimacy. And he won't use your vulnerabilities to elevate his own ego. In fact, the men who need you to be uncertain in order to feel important are exactly the ones who are not safe with your truth. They thrive on imbalance. They like you better when you're unsure of yourself, because it means you'll rely on them for validation. They may even act supportive at first, encouraging, affirming, but over time, that support gets replaced with subtle jabs, passive-aggressive comments, or comparisons that reinforce the very doubt you entrusted them with. And then you're trapped, not physically, emotionally. Here's the reality, self-doubt is a natural part of being human. Everyone has it. But your internal dialogue should never be outsourced to someone who hasn't earned your deepest trust, especially not in the early stages of a relationship. When you hand over your uncertainty too soon, you're essentially saying, "Here's the thing I'm still learning how to carry, will you hold it for me?" But if they're not stable, not strong, not emotionally grounded, they'll fumble it, they'll misuse it, and sometimes they'll even throw it back at you when they feel the need to shift power in their favor. That's why emotional discernment is critical. You can't just trust people because they listen. You trust people because they've shown emotional consistency over time, because they don't flinch when you speak your truth, because they respond, not react, because they respect silence and don't push for access to parts of you that are still under construction. There's also something to be said about how you carry your doubt. You don't have to announce it to heal it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is work through it in silence through journaling, therapy, prayer, or trusted mentors. Not everyone should be a witness to your rebuilding process. Some people are only equipped to appreciate the finished product, not the scaffolding, and that's okay. We live in a culture that often pressures women to be raw and vulnerable as a means of being relatable. But there's a line between openness and oversharing. Vulnerability is powerful, yes, but only when it's protected, only when it's intentional, only when it's offered to someone who has proven they can hold space without making it about them. So protect your inner voice. Don't hand your self-worth over to someone else's opinion. Don't let a man become the mirror you use to measure your value. That mirror should already exist within you. And if it's cracked, it's your job to repair it, not his job to reflect back what you're missing. Because once you depend on someone else to affirm your worth, you become easy to manipulate, to guilt, to emotionally corner. The woman who knows her worth even as she questions it is still more powerful than the one who begs for someone to define it for her. Self-doubt will visit, yes, but it doesn't get to move in. Not unless you invite it, and definitely not in front of someone who hasn't proven they're emotionally qualified to help you manage it. Let your confidence be earned from within. Let your growth be witnessed, not forced. And when you choose to reveal your struggles, make sure it's to someone who lifts, not leverages. Because the woman who guards her inner world is the woman who can never be truly controlled.